checking out the show with a glassy eye, looking at the sun dancing through the sky. Did he come by UFO? All right, hello there, thrill seekers, and that was a little snip of my cover of the song UFO by Jim Sullivan. Go look up Jim Sullivan. He was an interesting character who disappeared off the face of the earth. Maybe he was picked up by a UFO. And that song is about Jesus and whether Jesus was picked up by a UFO or came by a UFO. That's what it says. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe I should do a video about that one. I think it's an interesting topic, but that's not what this video is about. And by the way, this is my fourth, or maybe it's my fifth time doing this video. I had to keep stopping the video because Ziggy was barking at a squirrel. And then when I finally got through the video, 20-minute video, I got it in to try to edit it, and there was no sound. The sound was not there. In fact, I'm going to go check and make sure I'm recording sound.
Soon after.
Okay, confirmed. I am recording sound this time. So, I wanted to talk to you about something that I got an email a couple of days ago from a guy who works at the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it was about a Buddha statue that is in the museum whose caption, I don't know what you call those things, a placard, maybe it's called a placard, the little thingy that they put on a statue at a museum to explain to you what it is, that thing is wrong. And let me show it to you. It's also online, so I'm going to show you the version that's on their website. Hang on, let me find it. There it is. Okay, now you're looking at it and I'm looking at it too. Okay, it is titled Fasting Buddha Shakyamuni from Pakistan, Ancient Region of Gandhara, 3rd to 5th century. And what it says about this is, after reaching enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, Shakyamuni meditated and fasted for 49 days, thus showing him as an emaciated renouncer relates to his enlightenment and his status as a yogic ascetic. Is that what he is? Anyway, who has ultimate control over his body. Other characteristics that relate to his enlightenment include the kusha grass on which he sits and the scene at the base which shows the Buddha's first sermon at Saranath. Okay, that's what it says, and it's wrong. And I'm going to tell you why it's wrong, and then I'm going to give you one little piece of evidence that maybe it's right, but then I'm going to tell you why, even if it's right, it's wrong. Okay, so here we go. The reason I chose to do a video about this is it kind of shows the woeful lack of knowledge about the Buddha, who the Buddha was and what he did amongst Americans. Now, of course, I think the average American, Joe Bob on the street or whatever his name is or her name, there's no reason they should know that much about Buddhism. This isn't a Buddhist country. But people who are interested in Buddhism often don't know anything about the life of the Buddha. I've mentioned this before. I think I mentioned this on my video for Buddha is a Good Old Boy, the song I wrote. I put it up a few months ago. If you want to go look at that video, maybe you already have. I really felt this strongly when I did a podcast whose host was a yoga teacher and a person who was a frequent, I don't know if you call her a student, but she was a frequent visitor to Noah Levine's place, which was Against the Stream. I think it was called Against the Stream back then. Anyway, I don't know what's going on with that place, so I don't want to get into that mess. But anyway, she had more than a passing interest in Buddhism. That's the point. And during this podcast interview, I happened to say something, I don't remember exactly what I was talking about, but I said something about, it's like when the Buddha left the palace. And she goes, what? And I ended up having to explain to her what that means. And the Buddha leaving the palace is God. It's like Jesus rising from the dead. It's such a fact about Buddha that anybody who has even a passing interest in Buddhism should know what that means. But she didn't. And obviously whoever writes the captions or placards or whatever the hell they're called for the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art also doesn't know much about Buddhism. So let me tell you a little bit about who the Buddha was. Now, as I said, I've done this before in this channel, but I feel like it's worth revisiting. this morning I got kind of obsessed with the idea that what if I'm wrong? What because it's the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. Of course, they've got experts working on there. What if I got this whole thing wrong? So I consulted 3 books, and I want to show you which ones they were. First, I looked at A Concise History of Buddhism by Andrew Skilton. Next, I looked at Buddhist Religions, 5th edition. So there's several editions of this, and I guess they're all different. But this one's by Robinson, Johnson, and Thanissaro. And I think Thanissaro is like a Dharma name in the Theravadan sect, probably not the person's birth name. And then, just for good measure, because I was really obsessive, I went and checked out this book. This is called Gautama Buddha, Volume 1 by Hajime Nakamura. And as you can see, let's see how many pages. It's 500 pages long, very thick book, and this is one of the most thorough books about the life of Buddha that I've ever come across, maybe the most thorough book I've ever come across about the life of the Buddha. So anything you want to know, he's looked at all of the relevant texts in all of the relevant languages and studied historical documents and so forth and so on. So if there's anybody who can tell you about the life of the Buddha, this is the book to go to. And this is the reason I went for this one last, is because I knew it's so detailed. It's ridiculously detailed. So let me give you the brief outline of the life of Buddha. And to do that, I'm going to drag this thing out of my pocket, this little computerizer I got in my pocket, and I want to... I tried to do this on one of the versions of this video from memory, and then I realized I didn't have it memorized. So the meal chant that we chanted in Nishijima Roshi's retreats in Shizuoka went like this. Busho kapira jodo makada seppo harana nyumetsu kuchira nyorai oryoki. And that is a very brief outline of the Buddha's life. And I'll give you the version in English that's used by the San Francisco Zen Center, and I think this is sort of the official Soto Shu English version. Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, enlightened in Magadha, taught in Varanasi, entered nirvana in Kushinagara. Now we set out Buddha's bowls. That's the first part of the standard meal chant. So that gives you like a really short version of the Buddha's life. So what I'm going to give you right now is also going to be short, but a little bit longer. So the Buddha was born around 500 years BC. There's all sorts of arguments about exactly when he was born, and I don't even remember what the date they've settled on recently, but they'll probably revise that again someday. So it's around 500 BC. And he was born in, as the chant says, Kapilavastu, which is a town that no longer exists and is thought to be on where the border of Nepal and India is, so very northern India. And his father, in the traditional accounts, is a king, and the Buddha is a prince. It's said these days that probably he wasn't actually a king and the Buddha wasn't a prince, but they were high nobility. They were noble people. They had access to all the good things in life. They were very wealthy and very privileged people. That's the most important thing. The Buddha grew up in this life of privilege and stuff, and it had been prophesied when he was born that he would either be a great king or a great religious leader. And his father wanted him to be a great king. Maybe again, king might not be the word. It might be more of a political leader. But anyway, his father wanted him to be a political leader and not a religious dude. So he tried to keep him sheltered and living in the most luxurious life possible when the Buddha to be, who was Siddhartha at that time, was a young man. So he grew up surrounded by this luxury and wealth, and then the legend has it that one day he went outside the palace walls with his charioteer and saw 4 sights, which were an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a renunciate, a person who was seeking enlightenment, probably wearing the orange robes. Maybe they weren't orange at that time. Anyway, probably wearing robes, probably carrying a begging bowl, and dedicating himself to a life of austerity and meditation. So the the Buddha to be, Siddhartha, learned at this moment that there was aging, sickness, and death, and that there were people who were trying to find a way out of that. And he decided he was going to be one of the people who was trying to find a way out of that. But he kind of hesitated on his decision. So for the next few years, the accounts differ, for 10 or more years, he stayed in the palace, eventually got married, and had a child. And on the night that his child was born, he named the child Rahula, which means obstacle, and left the palace. That's the story that I was mentioning to the person on this podcast. So he left the palace to become a renunciate, and that set him on the path to become the Buddha. Now, a lot of people don't like the fact that he left behind a wife and child, but for one thing, we don't even know if this is historically accurate, because the Buddha himself only said that he left his home in opposition to what his parents wanted him to do. So he doesn't even mention, but there are mentions in the sutras about the wife and the child who did eventually join the Buddhist order. His mother was the one, no, his stepmother, because his mother had died during childbirth. His stepmother was the one who started the first order of monks, nuns, not monks, but female monks, and prevailed upon the Buddha to ordain women as monks, which was, I don't know if the Buddha was the first Indian spiritual teacher to ordain women, but if he wasn't the first, he was definitely among the earliest to do this, and was actually initially reluctant, but that's a story for another day. So he went off on this quest, and I want to make sure I get these names right. He met two teachers who taught him two different things.
Much later.
His first teacher was Alara Kalama, and he was one who taught him a form of meditation that led to an exalted state of absorption known as the sphere or state of no-thingness, or nothingness, depending on how you want to say it. And this teacher was so impressed, Alara Kalama was so impressed by the Buddha to be, that he wanted the Buddha to co-teach with him. But the Buddha said, no, this isn't the path of getting out of suffering. So he left Alara Kalama and started studying with a teacher named, let's see what this guy's name was. Okay, Udraka Ramaputra, who taught him how to achieve the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And once again, the Buddha mastered this, the Buddha to be, he wasn't the Buddha yet, he mastered this, but he found that this was not the way out of suffering, even though Ramaputra wanted the Buddha to be his successor, and in fact Ramaputra is said to have been so impressed by the Buddha that he regarded the Buddha to be, who wasn't the Buddha yet, sorry I keep saying that, as his own teacher. Okay. So he left that, and then he tried to follow the path of asceticism, and this is where we get into what that statue represents. He did a whole bunch of very painful practices where you just try to do without anything. So he's supposed to have slept in graveyards on bones and worn only cloth made of grass woven together and all sorts of things. And towards the end of this, he went on a very intensive fast, which was supposed to also relieve suffering. And this is what that statue depicts, I'm sure, but we'll get to why. Okay, I'll get back to that anyway. Here is what the Buddha himself is supposed to have said about his fasting. Because I ate so little, the joints of my limbs became like the joints of the asitika or the kala creeper. I don't know what those are, but they're plants. They must be brittle plants, I guess. Because I ate so little, my buttocks became like a camel's hoof, like a camel toe, I guess. Because I ate so little, my backbone protruded like a line of spindles. Because I ate so little, my ribs corroded and collapsed like the rafters of an old and rotten shed. Because I ate so little, the gleam of the pupils in my eye sockets appeared deeply sunken, as the gleam of water in a deep well appears deeply sunken. Because I ate so little, my scalp became wrinkled and shrunken like a bitter gourd that is picked before it is ripe. Then when I tried to touch the skin of my belly, I took hold of my backbone. And when I tried to touch my backbone, I took hold of the skin of my belly. Because I ate so little, the skin of my belly stuck to my backbone. And because I ate so little, when I thought I will evacuate my bowels or I will urinate, I would fall down on my face then and there. And when I stroked my limbs with the palm of my hand to soothe my body, the hairs the rotted at the roots came away from my body, and so forth and so forth. This is because he ate so little. So this is the description of him becoming very, very emaciated. And there are statues all over the place of this version of the Buddha, and it represents the Buddha during his 6 years of ascetic practice, which he gave up because he decided he was no closer to finding the end of suffering by doing these ascetic, torturous practices, but he was very close to dying, and he was going to die without ever figuring it out. So he wanted to live long enough to figure this thing out. And he is said to have accepted a bowl of arroz con leche, as my mother-in-law makes, because my mother-in-law is Mexican. It's probably an Indian version of arroz con leche, which is rice cooked in milk, that was offered to him by a girl who was going to give that as an offering to a deity, but decided that the Buddha needed it more than the deity did, so she gave it to him. And he took the food. His companions, he had these traveling companions who are depicted at the bottom of that statue, who had stuck with him but decided to leave him because this guy's a sellout. He's eating food now. So they left him, and then he sat under a fig tree, what is now called the Bodhi tree, and meditated until he found a great awakening. And after he found this great awakening, I'm going to tell you a few things about that, but let's just skip over those for now. And basically, he went out and tried to teach people how to find the same awakening he'd found for the next 45 years until he died at the age of 80 after eating either bad mushrooms or bad pork. People have been arguing for hundreds of years because the word in the texts, it could be interpreted either way about what the bad food that he ate was that killed him finally. But apparently he wasn't doing too well before he ate that anyway, so he's probably on his way out already. So there you go. That's the briefest version of the Buddha's life story I can give. Now, as to what I was going to say about my slight bit of evidence that the caption on that statue might be right, but it's very slim. When I was looking through this book, Gautama Buddha by Hajime Nakamura, I came across a very obscure story that I'd never seen before, a story that is not mentioned in either of these books and is not mentioned in most texts about the life of the Buddha. It's mentioned in here because, as I said, Professor Nakamura was very, very thorough, and he puts everything in this book. So, and there's the second volume too, if you want to go for that. So one of the stories, a very obscure story that Nakamura relates, says that after the 4th week, this is after the Buddha has accepted food, gotten his strength back, and has become enlightened, then he's sitting around for like a month, going to various places, meditating, trying to decide what to do about what he has discovered. Because he knows he's discovered something important, but he doesn't think anybody will understand it. So after about a month of going around and meditating, this is what happens. It says... this is after a further 7 days, making it the 4th week, Gautama finally went to a Rajayatana tree, and there delighted in liberation, and this is what the text says. After that, he went to the Rajayatana tree and sat there for 7 days, experiencing the joys of liberation. A full 7 weeks had passed. During that time, he fed on the joy of meditation, on the joy of the way to enlightenment, on the joy of the result, and neither rinsed his mouth, relieved himself, nor took food. He didn't even relieve himself during that time? Okay. Anyway, these stories are like fish stories. They get exaggerated as they get retold. At the end of 7 weeks, on the 49th day, as he sat there, he felt that he wanted to rinse his mouth. Saka, the ruler of devas, that's gods, brought the fruit of the medicinal Haritaka tree and gave it to him. The master ate it and evacuated his bowels, so at least we know that. Then Sokka gave him a toothpick made of snake creeper and water to rinse his mouth. I guess that's probably the closest they had to brushing your teeth back in those days. The master used the toothpick, the master being the Buddha, and rinsed his mouth with water from Anotata Pond and remained sitting at the foot of the Raja Yatana tree. So there is a little mention of him not eating after his enlightenment. It's unclear whether it's the full time after his enlightenment or just during this time he was sitting under the tree. But it's a very obscure mention, and it is certainly not told in anything like the detail of the story I just gave you, which is a much more popular and well-known story and often the subject of many, many statues. So even if in the unlikely event, which I think is highly unlikely, that this statue that the Met has happens to be a depiction of that story, that very obscure story that I just told you, and not the much, much, much more popular story of his 6 years of ascetic practice, even then, the Met should revise their placard or whatever. I don't know what those things are called. Whatever the thingy is, they should revise it to say that this is not a depiction of the much more popular story that everybody knows who knows anything about Buddhism. This is a depiction of the much more obscure story of the 49 days. And then the stuff about him being a yogic, what does it say? Sorry, I'm going to read it again, make sure I got it. It relates to his enlightenment and his status as a yogic ascetic. Come on. He's not a yogic ascetic. I mean, there is some relation between yoga and Buddhism, but to call the Buddha a yogic ascetic is just wrong. It's just wrong. I'm sorry, it's just wrong. So that's not what this depicts. It's as if you went to Tokyo or I don't know, Bangkok, and saw a medieval painting of Jesus walking on water, and then the little placard or whatever below it says this is a depiction of Jesus riding on the back of a whale that shows his mastery of animals of the sea and land or something like that. I mean, it's so wrong that anybody who knows about Buddhism would go, what? You know, and if in the unlikely event that the medieval statue or the medieval painting in question actually does depict some obscure story of Jesus riding on the back of the whale, then you would want to notate that, because everybody else would think, oh, that's him walking on water. That's not him riding on the back of a whale. So you'd want to make a note of that. So even if it's right, it's wrong. So I just thought that was really interesting, and it obsessed me for a couple of days while I was thinking about this and reading about it. So I wanted to relate it to you. And also it just shows, as I said, the lack of awareness. And I think people watching this channel, anybody who's got enough interest in Buddhism to watch a YouTube channel like this, really should know the basic outline of the Buddha's life. You know, I mean, anybody who's going to Against the Stream or some Buddhist temple somewhere really ought to know the basic outline of the Buddha's life. I mean, that's just like such, 101 stuff that everybody should know it. How important it is. It's important to know that, even if you don't think it's historically accurate, or, there's a lot of dispute about the historical accuracy of those stories. And Nakamura's book goes deeply into those and all the various versions of the stories and how they've changed over time. This is a real interesting book if you want to take a deep dive into that kind of stuff. So there you go. And I think, oh, by the way, that book, last time I looked it up on Amazon, they wanted $900 for the only copy that was available. But I'm pretty sure that it's available on the Terabest website, which I mentioned before. I don't want to give those guys too much advertising, so you're going to have to go find it yourself. It's Terabest. Anyway, go look for it. They got downloads of all kinds of Buddhist literature, including a lot of stuff that's really hard to find, including stuff like this that apparently is $900 to buy these days. But they also have illegal downloads of my books, and I don't like that, so that's why I don't want to give them too many props, but they're very useful. Anyway, all right, so if you want to donate to me not getting so starving that my ribs stick out through my belly and that you can push on my belly and feel my backbone and all that, you can donate to me at the URL that you're seeing below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, there are going to be direct links in the description below to where you can donate. And I really appreciate your donations. But as I've said many times before, you don't got to donate if you don't want to donate. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey, Ziggy, how you doing? Ziggy, look at the folks. Look at the folks. Come here. Look at the folks. All right. You got your hair trimmed since the last time the folks have seen you. That's because you were getting all kinds of allergies and stuff, and that's why we had to take you to the vet. All right, Ziggy, I'm going to edit the video. We'll talk to you later. Bye.